What does it mean to love one another? Is it an emotion of the heart? An act of service? A force of the will? Can love ever truly be defined? We think so often in simple terms, but real love goes much deeper. It strengthens the weak, helps those in need, lives in harmony with all people, and holds us accountable. Love means carrying each other's burdens, admonishing and instructing, showing compassion and feeling it too, spurring one another to good deeds, confessing and forgiving, building and maintaining trust, being of one mind no matter our differences. Love means accepting others for who they are and allowing ourselves to be changed in the process. So love holds us together, grafted by faith into the one true Christ, whose example compels us to love one another.
So I love to talk about love. This next Sunday, I'll begin a 2-week series on married love. We're going to talk about the meaning of marriage. But today I want to talk about love in a different context. Today is Connection Sunday. You'll notice there are tables right over here to my left and up here at the front concerning our connection groups and the importance of being in a group. And I hope you'll plan to take just a few minutes right after this service is over to check those out. You know, the Geico people say 15 minutes could save you 15%. Well, 15 minutes could change your life, honestly, if you choose to get involved in a group. And we all need that kind of love. I can remember nearly 30 years ago when I went through a personal crisis in my life, and I really was on the edge. In fact, I think as I look back that I might have been close to being temporarily insane, and it was incredibly devastating and difficult for me. And I needed a group of people to help me navigate that crucible. And I had a group of preachers who really helped me. They were guys that I'd been with a lot, and we had prayed with each other and encouraged each other. And so I met with them, and they were there to really be in my corner and love me and to pray me through that crisis. And I'm not sure I would have emerged sane or alive or healthy had it not been for those guys who were then in my life. Now, it's not always good to be with a group of preachers. It can be a negative thing. I remember in 2005 traveling to Greece, and at the end of that Greece tour, we stopped I was traveling with 11 preacher guys, 11 preacher buddies of mine, and it was a great trip. But we stopped for the last visit on the trip. We stopped in a city that is known to be the #1 honeymoon spot in all of Southern Europe. And I thought, why am I here with 11 preachers? I mean, this is not good. Where is my wife? And so it was not altogether good, but those guys were great. And then later I thought about a few years ago when our special needs daughter Hannah was born, and I thought about the way in which our group rallied to Holly and me, and they prayed for us, and they brought meals for us, and they volunteered to take care of Hannah so that Holly and I could have an occasional night out. It was great, but there was one friend who brought a gift to us during that time that I still kind of resent. It was, Hannah loved Barney, and it was this not life-size, but a big Barney, and the hands would move and the feet would move, and he would talk and sing, the songs of Barney. And so Hannah would sit in front of the TV watching Barney, and Barney's at her side, and I'm going, oh man, I've had enough of Barney. Because he brings with him this insufferable entourage of Baby Bop and BJ, and it just drove me nuts. But being part of that group really was a huge gift for us, to know that they were there alongside us and encouraging us and praying for us. Relationships determine the quality and direction of your life. Relationships determine the quality and the direction of your life. And I want to give you a definition of love today that's not original with me. It actually comes from Scott McKnight, but I think it's terrifically helpful. He says that love is a rugged commitment to being with, and for and unto. It's a series of prepositions. It is a rugged commitment to being with and for and unto. Love is rugged. It's rugged. I have couples come, into my office for premarital counseling, and they've got stars in their eyes, and they're infatuated with each other and so intoxicated with their love. And I want to just reach across the table and grab them by the shoulders and say, you have no idea how hard this is going to be. You have no clue how arduous this is going to be. This is going to challenge every single thing in your being. Because they think, oh man, this is going to be easy. And real love is the husband whose wife gets sick, and for the next 30 years he cares for her. That's a mark of how rugged love sometimes is. Love is a rugged commitment. The biblical word is covenant. Now, we don't really use that word very much, but it's a rich word. And you see covenant, especially in Genesis 12, when God says to Abraham, I'm going to be your God, and you're going to be my people. And then in Genesis 15, I'm going to be your shield and your reward, and I'm going to be faithful to you. And I'm going to embrace you and love you always. And this has nothing at all to do with reciprocity. There are no strings attached to this love. I am absolutely unconditionally committed to you. Abraham, I want you to know that even when you're unfaithful, I'm going to be faithful. Even when the people of Israel prostitute themselves, I'm going to be there for them. I'm going to love them through thick and thin, because this is an absolute, unconditional, irrevocable commitment on which I will never renege. Love is a rugged commitment. It is a rugged commitment to be with. To really understand love, maybe we need to do some withful thinking, because it has to do with being with. Then it starts in the Old Testament, and then you fast forward to Matthew chapter 1, where one of Jesus' names is Emmanuel, God with us. And then in Matthew 18, verse 20, Jesus says, where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them. And then he crowns the Great Commission in Matthew 28:20. You need to remember, I will be with you always. It's the gift of presence. And you find this in John chapter 13. Jesus is about to go to the cross, and he knows it. Verse 1, it was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Jesus has personified the meaning of his name Emmanuel for the last 3 years. He has been with the disciples 24/7. Everything they do together. They eat together. They pray together. They travel together. They cast out demons together. On rare occasions, Jesus will go up into the mountains to pray, but other than those times, he's always with these guys. And now he's about to die, and he chooses to be with them, even though he knows they're not going to be with him. John 16, verse 32. The time is coming, and in fact has come, when you will be scattered each to your own home. You will leave me all alone, yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me. Not one of these guys will be with him at the cross. He will take with him into the Garden of Gethsemane Peter and James and John, but they will not be with him. They will fall asleep. But still he chooses, in the hour of his greatest need, to be with them. Do you understand the priority that the Bible attaches to being with each other? One of the most painful and poignant passages in all of Scripture is 2 Timothy chapter 4. Paul is in prison in Rome. He knows it's likely he's about to die. And listen to what he writes to his young protege, Timothy. Do your best. Do your best to come to me quickly. For Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, and Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Demas isn't here. He's deserted me. Crescens is gone. Titus is gone. Only Luke is with me. And the pathos is even deeper in verse 21 when he says again to Timothy, do your best to come before winter. Paul is saying if winter weather sets in, it's unlikely you're going to be able to have a passage to Rome. If winter sets in, you're not here. I may never get to see you, Timothy, again before my death. Please do your best. Do your best to come before winter. And so, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24, let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works, and let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. Don't neglect meeting together. Don't neglect being with each other. One of the most countercultural statements in the Bible is found in Acts chapter 2, verse 46. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. They worshiped together. They prayed together. They ate together. They did life together. And they didn't do it in a hurry. You can't form meaningful community in a hurry. You can't love in a hurry. You can't pray with others in a hurry. And you can't experience meaningful community if you're tethered to technology. Read this last week that the average American spends about 5.5 hours every day connected to some kind of media. A survey of freshman women at Baylor University said they spend about 10 hours per day on their phones. And do you know the Pokemon stop craze? If you're a teenager, you probably do. If you're older, you might not. But the Nintendo people have this thing. Don't get out your phones, by the way. They've got this thing, where you have a Pokemon stop, and there are designated stops according to certain GPS designations. And by the way, BridgeWay happens to be a Pokestop. There are people who pull off of 407 every day, pull underneath the canopy of our building, so that they can capture a Pokemon character. Can you believe it? But if you are attached to technology, it mitigates against your relationships. Let's suppose you die and by the grace of God you're saved, and Jesus takes you into a room, and it's a video room, and he shows you a video of your life, and the video happens to focus on those moments when you haven't been numbed out or preoccupied by technology. Those moments when you've really engaged with other people. Those moments when you've been fully connected to somebody else. How long would your video last? How many moments would it capture that show you fully engaged and attuned to other people? You see, love is a rugged commitment to being with, and that's one of the reasons why, being part of a connection group is so important. You got to be with other people so that you can do life together. You got to experience presence together. And then love is not just a rugged commitment to being with, it's also a rugged commitment to being for. Verse 2 of John 13, it was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. And then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around them. Jesus is not only committed to being with his disciples, he's also committed to being for his disciples. Foot washing in the ancient world was a degrading task. If a child washed his parents' feet, or a wife washed her husband's feet, or a servant washed his teacher's feet, it was an act of extreme devotion. And nobody in the ancient world who was at a certain social status would ever stoop to wash the feet of somebody at a lower status. It just didn't happen. But Jesus takes the posture of a slave. And it's especially notable whose feet he washes. He washes the feet of all these guys, even though he knows they're not going to be there for him. He washes the feet of Judas, even though he knows very soon, Judas will go out and sell him out for 30 pieces of silver. He washes the feet of Peter, even though very soon Peter is going to deny him with oaths and cursing 3 times. He still washes his feet, and then after the resurrection, you remember he and Peter are standing there on the shore, and he reinstates Peter into ministry. Now, if it had been me, I wouldn't have washed any feet. Had I chosen to wash anybody's feet, I certainly would have passed up Judas and Peter, but not Jesus, because Jesus is always for us. He's always for you. He's never against you. Who do you have in your life who's for you? I mentioned that crisis that I went through nearly 30 years ago. At that point in my life, I had to leave ministry. I had to empty my office of all of my books, and I had a lot of books. And I had a friend who called me, and he said, "Art, could I come over and just help you take the books out of your library?" His name was David. And he brought over about 30 or 40 boxes and tape, rolls of tape, and one of those tape dispensers. And he and I spent about, I don't know how many hours we spent, a lot of hours just taking those books off the shelf, putting them in boxes, delivering them to my dusty old garage. And then about 3 years later, by His grace, God gave me an opportunity to go back into ministry, and guess who called me? David. "Art, could I come help you put books into your new office?" And so he came by, he had his pickup truck, and he and I spent a few hours loading up those books in his truck, and then we went to the office, and he helped me put them on the shelves. He had my back. He had my back. Who has your back? You know, there's a great example of this in the New Testament. Saul is about to become Paul. He becomes Paul after he's converted to Christ. He's been out there just murdering Christians and having Christians put in prison. And now he's ready to tell people about Christ, and he's so excited about that, but people are skeptical. And they say, we can't trust this guy. This can't work. I mean, how do we know this is not a ruse? How do we know this is not a guise? Maybe he's really using this to camouflage his efforts to capture Christians, and he needs somebody who's going to have his back. And Barnabas steps up. Barnabas has his back, and he vouches for Saul, now Paul. And then Paul is able to proceed with sharing the gospel. Who has your back? Who's going to be there for you when you're in a crisis? Who's going to be there to pray for you? Who's going to pack your books? Who's going to carry your load? Who's going to be Team Alice or Team Bob or Team Fred or Team George? Who are the people who are going to be there for you? That's what happens when you're in these kinds of groups. There are people who are there to bear your burdens. There are 94 passages in the New Testament that speak of 100 one another phrases. 100. Well, love is not just a rugged commitment to being with and for. It's also a rugged commitment to being unto. Unto. This time, verse 12. After washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, "Do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, because that's what I am. And since I, Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth, slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them." Love is not just with, and it's not just for, it's unto. It gives direction. These kinds of friendships are transformative. These guys are never going to be the same. Now, they're going to have some stumbles along the way, but here, the one who has made their feet is washing their feet. Here, the one who should be served is serving. There are 12 lords in the room and one servant, and that one servant is the Lord of the universe. But this is going to change these guys for the rest of their lives, because now they're beginning to understand life is not about being served, it's about serving. And that's what happens again in relationships and connection groups. We sharpen each other. We grow because we are with each other. A simple illustration. When Holly and I first got married, I was glad to be generous to certain things. I was glad to be generous to the church, and I was glad to be generous to missions. But then she came along with these annoying special projects. Well, what about this orphan over here in Africa who could use some monthly support? There's this family in the church, they really got some needs, and I'll tell you, I was not responsive, and I pretty much shut that down. But over time, as a result of God's work through the Holy Spirit and Holly's influence and her servant heart, God softened me. And I have become more willing to be generous in those kinds of ways when earlier I hadn't been. That's the consequence of connection. That doesn't happen in isolation. It doesn't happen when you're just all by yourself. You've got to be in connection with other people. And I'll just say, in terms of the group that Holly and I are part of, I have learned something about Christ from every single person in our group. I've learned about service from Mark Burt and the way I've watched him do construction for a widow and her special needs son. I've learned about humility from Roger Branson and his unassuming, humble heart. And I could just go around the circle of our group and I could name every single one, and I could say, here is something, some dimension about Christ that I've learned from this person and this person and this person. There's huge value. There's huge development and maturity and growth that comes from being in connection with other people. So love is a rugged commitment to being with and for and unto. And the order matters. Scott McKnight points out that the order matters. The sequence is important. You got to start with, and then you move to for, and then you move to unto. And you know this in your own experience, don't you? You got a child that you want to see changed, but if you're not with that child and for that child, your efforts to change that child or direct that child are going to be experienced as coercion. It's true in my life. There are things in my life where I need change and challenges, but you got to come to me first and be with me, and I've got to know that you are for me. But when I know that you're with me, when I know that you are for me, I'm going to be a whole lot more receptive to some of the changes that God wants to work through you alongside me and unto me. Dr. Henry Cloud tells about a preacher, we'll call him Joe, who had a sexual addiction issue. And he struggled so mightily with it, and he just couldn't seem to make any progress. He decided he would join a group. And at first, when he went to the group, he just kind of listened. And then one day, he started opening up. And as he did, he shared this story of shame and pain and just how hypocritical he felt, because he would stand before a church and he would talk to people about honoring God, but he himself was not honoring God. And as he poured out his story, his head was down. And he just felt like he was dripping with shame. And Henry Cloud, who was leading the group, said, "Listen, Joe, I want you to raise your head and look into the eyes of the people in the group. I can't do it. I'm too full of shame. You've got to do this, Joe. You've got to lift your eyes." And so he did. He lifted his head and he looked into the eyes, and in the eyes of every single person in the group, he could see tears. The power of his addiction was broken that day because he was with a group not ready to shame him, not ready to vilify him, not ready to wound him, not ready to judge him, but a group of people who loved him. The power of his addiction was broken that day. And it's not that he didn't have some more work to do. He still had confessions to make and work to do, but it was broken that day because he was with a group of people who were with and for and unto. See, the enemy wants to keep us in this room. As great as this is, as fantastic as it is for us to worship together and to experience corporate worship, Satan wants to keep us here because he knows that he will stunt our spiritual growth, that we'll never really experience true love, genuine loving relationships until or unless we connect with other people in smaller settings. And so that's why I'm encouraging you this morning, take just a few minutes, check these out. Inside your worship guide, you'll find this insert. It gives you more specific direction about who leads groups and where they are and the kinds of things that they do together. Child care, no child care. Take just a few minutes and move around the perimeter over here to my left and meet our connection group leaders and discover opportunities for growth that you would never have otherwise. Love is a rugged commitment to being with and for and unto. Let's bow and pray.